For the first episode of Builder's Journey, I spoke to Jeff Kauffman, leader of Jump, a community of marketing and advertising professionals from top agencies, brands, and startups that are passionate about Web3. Jeff and I met and came through Seed Club's second Accelerator together, and have now been in this wild Web3 space for almost a year. In our conversation, we explore how he grew his community from Web2 to Web3, how he onboards members through generosity and empowerment, and how he's learning and building through the real technical challenges of being a Web3 pioneer. Good morning, Jeff.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm awesome. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for being here. Thanks for joining. So you are the first guest in this new pillar of the club podcast. Welcome to this new pillar. I was hoping that you'd start out. I've known you now for almost a year, we were just talking about, but for people who don't know you and haven't had that pleasure yet, I would love if you would introduce yourself and tell us who you are.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to be here, excited to talk about club and jump and my story as well. So I guess sort of in the middle of the story of myself and the project that I've founded, joined Seed Club's incubator and accelerator for the second cohort and earlier of this year, which launched in March 2021. Before that, I spent the better part of 12 years in the enterprise advertising and marketing world. So mostly focused on the world of Web 2, social, mobile, and all of what that encompasses. And so that's kind of the last 10 to 12 years before getting sort of struck by the bug of Web 3 really hard in 2020 and spending a lot of time trying to figure out what my place in Web 3 looked like before going full time and launching Jump.
And yeah, we're going to dive into what that sort of in-between stage was and what you learned and how it all worked. But I guess just to give a little bit of level setting, can you tell me what is Jump and what's your role there?
Absolutely. So Jump is a community of marketing and advertising professionals. So when I dove into Web3 and really started trying to figure out what that would look like for an individual like myself with my background, it was just very apparent when I spoke to my peer group and other people in the advertising and marketing world that these concepts of NFTs and DAOs and social tokens, the awareness of those words, even in those concepts, was zero when we look back at 2020, which is funny because we fast forward to now, December 2021. And if you were to walk into any advertising agency and you said, have you heard of an NFT? Any advertising agency worth anything, that everyone in the building is going to say, yeah, absolutely. But if you go back a year ago, the awareness of these terms was virtually zero. And so what I had decided to do, because I wanted to dive into the space and go as deep as I could, I decided the best first step for myself and maybe the advertising and marketing industry at large was that we needed a community for ourselves to have conversations that are specific to the work that we do out in the world. And we needed to build that community as natively to Web3 as possible. So it's not worth it to just get on PowerPoint slides and podcasts and write blog posts about these concepts. The best way to learn is actually to build and get our hands dirty. And so as we have these conversations, let's build a community using all of these tools and using all of these concepts, and kind of use ourselves as this test bed to really learn what this space is all about. So that's what Jump is. And then today, launched the community, I would say formally in April of 2021, which was, when I say launch, it was Zoom calls. It was groups of people from all over the world. We would host Zoom calls and and talk about Web3 and introduce some of these concepts. And those Zoom calls, which started out with 30 people on the very first Zoom call, has grown into a community of about 700 people in Discord doing all kinds of stuff. So it's been pretty fun.
And you said 3 people or 30 people?
I'm sorry, I said 30.
30. No, but
30.
still, like 30 to 700 is amazing. Yeah, I definitely want to get into that because I think that there's some extremely rudimentary and yet incredibly important tools and tactics that community leaders such as yourself use. And I think that often people looking in from the outside think that it's some sort of, like magical technological utopia. And actually it's a lot of just person to person interaction. So we're going to get into that. But I guess, first of all, I'm really curious about your Accelerator experience. We were talking recently and you discussed that looking back, the stage that you were in, and I'd love for you to describe that, was actually maybe really early for the Accelerator. And we're looking at projects now applying to our Accelerator. The application's opened just 2 days ago. They'll close in about a week and a half. And we're seeing, applications from projects that have tokens already out in the world or are already DAOs themselves. You were much earlier. And I'm curious, looking back, how do you feel about the stage that you were in for the Accelerator? And what are your thoughts as projects now look at applying and think about, when's the right time to apply and when's the right time to go through something like this?
Yeah, absolutely. So first and foremost, in order to have a successful project, you have to have a community. And so that has to be built first. Well, maybe before the community, you have to have an idea. And so Jump was at the idea phase. Really started thinking hard about Jump after talking to a lot of my peer group in, let's call it December. Well, yeah, 1 year ago, December 2020. Then applying to Seed Club's cohort and then starting the cohort in February 2021. And so at that point, Jump was just an idea. With that said, my peer group was very aware that I was diving hard into this space, and there was an awareness of my effort and that I was learning in the space and contributing ideas, but there wasn't a community. I would say it was more, if anything, the idea of Jump had an audience, but it hadn't formed into a community yet. So when I joined the Accelerator, it was at that idea stage with a bit of an audience, meaning the people in my network were aware of kind of what was going on. So the Accelerator was fantastic because it was a brain dump of just unbelievable information and ideas. But then at the end of the Accelerator, I had the next step and the next charge of build the community, because all of the ideas and all of the information, tokenomics, DAOs, governance, all this incredible Web3 stuff doesn't really matter if you don't have a community to apply it to, right? It's kind of like putting the old saying of putting the cart before the horse, or tactics in front of strategies and things like that. And so when I joined the Accelerator, there's a lot of positives in terms of getting that information before building the community. With that said, I do feel like I was a bit early in going through the Accelerator because, I needed to do some other work before putting all of that to practice. Early 2021 was definitely a different time than it is now. A lot of the information out there, or that we experienced in SEO in our second cohort, Mirror wasn't live. So there weren't blog posts and just unbelievable content to sort of reference. And so, yeah, I mean, projects and people that want to be builders in the space right now actually have access to a lot of the information that we were exposed to then, and a lot of great ideas. And so I would just encourage anyone to focus on building a community and having a strong community, because once you kind of hit the accelerator stage in like a community like Seed Club, that's when you want to start to apply some of these more Web3 fundamentals and ideas and strategies, and layer that on top of the community that you've built.
Yeah, and so, you'd also talked about like the validation of coming into the accelerator and like being accepted into the accelerator. There's that element of just, okay, somebody from the outside is looking at what I'm building, looking at the idea that I have so far, or the small network that I've assembled, and sort of giving it that thumbs up from, a place of Web3 authority. And so I'm curious, what your opinions are of other ways to get that validation or proof of concept out in the market, because I think that is a huge piece of building these communities, or building it out, putting a token out, is just the validation that yes, this is going to work. Somebody believes in you other than yourself. And I think that we look at SEO too, and sort of the joke that I've heard from a couple of communities is like, were I to have applied, with what I had at that time now to the accelerator, I might not have made it in, because, the demand was so, so much less, and the amount of projects that we're building was so much less. And so knowing that not every project makes it in, but that there's far more, qualified applications than ultimately are going to get those like 10 to 15 slots. What are other ways that communities can feel that validation and proof of concept, other than one of those 10 to 15 coveted spots?
Sure. I think to be successful in Web3, maybe it's not too different than just building a successful startup, but I feel like you're always trying to come from something. You're trying to evolve from another community. And so I don't want to say Seed Club has helped Jump immensely. But I was hard-headed enough that I was going to pursue it regardless of getting accepted. And would Jump make it to DAO stage and token liquidity and all of that on its own? I think so. I think it's going to be better because it comes from Seed Club. But I think we'd get there. But we're definitely going to be a different flavor. And there's now DNA inside of Jump that comes from Seed Club. So there's going to be an effect there that makes Jump something that it wouldn't have been otherwise. But the community that I came from was the advertising and marketing community. So 10 to 12 years within that community and within that network. That's a good network and a good community to launch into a new phase of something. And so that was a strategy that, I had from the start. I wasn't going to go into Web3 and try to do something that didn't feel like I was evolving from where I had been. And so my advice to really anyone that's building is, what current community are you a part of that makes sense for you to evolve into? And then if that's tough to answer, then the next question, or the next maybe path, is what community can you join and add value to and become part of that community, and then evolve out of that community into your own Web3 project, and do it in a way that adds value back to the community that you came from. So that's kind of how I think about it. I always think about it as, what community are you currently a part of, and what potential communities can you join, and then evolve from there. I think Jump and myself have sort of a double benefit. We have the community that I have come from for the last 12 years, and then we now have the community that is Seed Club. And so there's sort of a double whammy, if you will, in terms of Jump's DNA and the communities that Jump comes from.
Yeah, I think that, one of the things that we know to be most valuable and certainly a value add with the Accelerator and Seed Club as we expand our community in general is that network. And, friends in Web3 high places is so important. You talked about how you did have your community and your network pre-Accelerator, pre-Web3. And I think we talk a lot about both we're throwing out the playbook, but then also not trying to reinvent the wheel. And so I'm curious, obviously you were working at a time when you saw, and, we're in an industry where the rise of social media and all of the different platforms and the ways that they're used by brands just skyrocketed. And I'm curious how many lessons from that experience and from that world have ported over? And is it sort of direct lessons? Is it more of this, curious mindset that clearly led you into Web3? How many of those lessons and tools have been valuable in this Web3 world that you're now currently building in?
I would say some of it immensely valuable, and some of it I'm just throwing away, just throwing it in the garbage. And so what I'll say was immensely valuable, which is super interesting if you've been around the block a little bit longer and you're not just now starting your career, which is back from 2000 to 2007, a lot of this sentiment of being able to self-organize on the internet and to be able to bypass the gatekeepers, and for creators to have a direct relationship with their customers, their communities, their fans. Those were really strong vibes. And so when and another example, you hear in Web3 all the time, URL to IRL, right? All that kind of stuff. The URL to IRL I was doing in 2005. And the example was my first sort of entry into sort of building communities and brands online was with MySpace, if you can remember MySpace. So 2005, two things kind of happened. And these are the things that I'm carrying into Web3. So two things happened. I started to look at the new technology, the internet, and what was possible to build brands and communities. And two, I started to skydive. And both those things kind of happened at the same time. And so as I started skydiving, I had about 9 jumps at the time. And I was just obsessed with the community. I decided I'd just start a MySpace page for Skydive Dallas, just whatever. Truly decentralized. Nobody's permissionless. No, the business isn't telling me what to do. And I just start this MySpace page. So fast forward a couple of months, the manager of the skydiving center came up to me and he's like, "Are you running a MySpace page for us?" And I was like, "Yes." Am I in trouble now because I didn't ask? And he said, "We have these comment cards, where down at the bottom of the comment card, it says, 'How did you hear about us?' And people are writing MySpace." And he was like, "This is fantastic. We should be giving you free jumps." And I was like, "This is great. I should get free skydives because I'm a poor college student and I need help with this expensive hobby." So that sort of kicked off this sort of relationship where I ran digital marketing and community building for Skydive Dallas, and then ended up making 1,800 skydives. And that was just a whole fun sort of experience. But what was happening is I was building this online community. And then so many people that I was meeting online, then I would meet in real life all over the country at drop zones. And it'd be like, we're best friends because, I'd show up in a new city and I would immediately be staying at someone's house, having dinner with them. And we shared the same bond, the the sport of skydiving, but we met online and we were aware of each other through all of the content, just interacting in these communities. Funny, in 2007, I had the largest Facebook page for skydivers in the world. Um, so that was fun. But that, like, okay, 2005 to 2007, this is community building. This is URL to IRL. This is like all of that stuff. But we didn't have tokens, to sort of coordinate in new and interesting ways. It's also funny because just the world of skydiving, nobody cares about it. So it's really hard to capture any sort of value. So it's just a money pit that we all throw our money into because we're obsessed with this sport. So it's funny what could happen if you layer on tokens to such a passionate, community like that. But that was the sentiment in the early 2000s, or mid 2000s. And then Facebook started to grow up, and then they went public in 2012, and they had to make money. And they decided advertising would be that model to make money. And that basically shut down this free forming ecosystem and the ideas that would allow people to kind of self-organize and meet and build communities, because Facebook and Google and these middlemen needed a different way to make money. So Web 2's number one business model is advertising. Second to that is e-commerce. And then after that is SaaS. And Web 3's fundamental business model will not be advertising at the core. There will probably be ads somewhere, but it won't even be close to the top of the business models. So Web 3 starts to unlock a lot of new business models and a lot of new opportunities. And that's where I think we get back to some of these fundamental ideas that we thought the web was going to have in the early 2000s, that we didn't experience between 2010 and 2012.
That's amazing. I mean, I've known you for about a year, but I was not aware of the particulars of that story. And I mean, I love everything about it, including the obvious ties to, the community name that you're in now and that you founded. So, yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. And for those of us that are old enough to have experienced that wave of internet, there are definitely some pieces of the ethos that feel really familiar. And I've just absolutely loved having so many new digital friends and getting to meet them, in real life and feeling that connection. And I feel like that was supposed to kind of be the promise of things like Facebook, where you would have these amazing, internet connections and then, continue those relationships offline. And yeah, for whatever reason, I feel that happening much more now, in Web3 and at a far greater pace. So I guess switching gears a little bit, because yeah, I think that certainly there was those pieces of the fact that, you just started things off and all of a sudden there was this community that, I think you have a good point that the skydiving community is not necessarily like one with extreme revenue generation. It's not necessarily one where you all would have been able to potentially share in an upside there. But, moving in now to what you're building, I'm curious to talk a little bit about how you've been building out the community there and thinking about some of that, work sharing, leadership sharing, value sharing. So maybe to start out, why don't you talk a little bit about how you brought people in? So you were talking about, it really just started as these like Zoom calls. You had maybe 30 people who were aware, they were interested. How did you start bringing people in and getting them excited? How did you communicate your vision? Because you were pretty much one person with this idea. So what did that look like in the beginning, and how did you build from 30 to 700 plus?
Absolutely. So there's two starting points. So maybe these examples will be relevant to one starting point and not the other starting point. So my starting point was my community and this project that I'm working towards. The members and the audience and ultimately who became community members, their level of knowledge of Web3 was not high, if zero. And they're just intrigued, like I was, at like, wow, this is new, this is fresh, and I'm tired of the old world, and I just want to dive into something new and be at the forefront. So that's one, is kind of community is experiencing Web3 for the first time. And then the other community is highly knowledgeable of Web3. So then if you're trying to build, right, a community or a project, and those that you're building for are really knowledgeable, then there's going to be a little bit of a different strategy. The through line between both is probably finding a way to bring people together on a regular basis. And so you kind of like, the number one thing when building a community is you're trying to create a drumbeat. And one of the best ways to do that is like a weekly meeting, or a weekly hangout. And so that could be in real life. If the community is all in the same city, more than likely it won't be. Hangout could be in the metaverse. If people are more advanced, the hangout could be on a Zoom call. The hangout could be in a Telegram chat. But really the idea is to create some sort of hangout, and then get that to a regular cadence as quickly as possible. And you don't need a lot of people to do that. You just need a few. And if that hangout is valuable and fun, and you look forward to it, and the other people look forward to it, then I think almost inevitably a community is going to form out of that. So Jump's approach was, okay, how do we get this group of people together for that first hangout? Like, what's that first hangout kind of look like? Well, it's kind of, for the most part, middle of COVID, so it's not going to be in real life. And for the most part, my personal network here in the city that I'm in isn't aware of Web3. And so this sort of network that's going to be interested in this topic is spread out kind of all over the world. So the very simple tactic was throw up a website, and with a logo that said Jump, and it said just request invite. And that's it. Very intentional not to try to explain anything from there. If you sort of have interacted with me or follow me online, and I'm posting about this, you generally understand. And so it's just like, let's cut to the chase. Let's request an invite. And once we got, once the invite list got to about 30 to 40 people, that's when I sent out the meeting link for the first hangout. And that was it. And so when we hung out, my goal in that hangout was to try to add as much valuable and make it really fun, and make it so that the people who took time out of their busy day, and their jobs and their families, that they would leave that hangout and be like, wow, and they'd want to talk about it afterwards. So I put a lot of time, months. Actually, I would say the presentation that I gave, so it was an hour-long hangout. I presented for about 30 minutes and then left the other 30 minutes for conversation, and just asking people kind of what they thought. And so that presentation that I gave, I'd been researching that content for the better part of a year and a half and pulling it together. So it was a lot of work that led into to those slides that were, I don't know, like 20 slides. But try to tell the story. And then at the end, sort of open it up to Q&A. There's several people on the call that I knew. It was awesome. There's a bunch of people that I didn't know. There were people from all over the world, kind of tuning in, even though it was 30 people. There were several countries and continents represented. And so I just kind of threw it out there and started asking people questions and trying to get a conversation going. So it wasn't just a one-way dialogue. And so I did that 3 times. And I was continually updating everybody that, hey, we're doing a Zoom call. We're doing a Zoom call. We're doing a Zoom call. Okay, this is our last one. And now that we've kind of had about 90 people across these Zoom calls, we're going to open up a Discord, and it's going to be super simple, but this is now going to be a place for us to hang out and keep this kind of conversation going. Ultimately, that led into what became our first regularly scheduled hangout. So it was actually quite a long time. In retrospect, I wish I could have got to that regularly scheduled hangout a bit sooner. And as I've learned, I definitely would have, if, having the knowledge that I have now. But by about August, we started what we called our member roundtable series, which happened every Thursday. And just someone within that group would just start to tell their story and talk about what they're interested in Web3. And that became this regularly kind of conversation. And what that did for our community is, and for myself, is it helped everyone sort of see that there's a lot of people out in the world with a similar background of them that have all of these questions and are super passionate about this space, and that it's worth kind of just paying attention to and showing up every Thursday for this member roundtable hangout.
And yeah, that's something, I mean, I'm not an active participant, but I'm definitely an active lurker in Jump, is how I like to think of myself. And I'm just, blown away at the velocity and the growth that I've seen, but also the accountability and people stepping up. And so you talked about that, you participated in the Accelerator as yourself. You were very much a one-man show. And I'm curious what that leadership journey has been like for you, and how I think really skillfully I've seen you go from, this one person to then sharing accountability and sharing workspace and responsibility and leadership opportunities with members of your community. And how have you done that? And what has that process been like? Because, I think it's really necessary. One person can't do everything. But at the same time, this is this precious idea and project that you've been working on for over a year now, from when you had the, very first ideas and started doing research. So what has that tension been like? And then also just tactically, what have been some best practices in bringing people on?
Sure. So one of the things that I have wanted to lean into as hard as possible is this idea of community driven from the ground up, to the extent that if the community just takes Jump and runs with it and it just goes off and I have no control over it, that I'm okay with it. And being okay with that helps. And I think people can feel that. So first, I feel like if you feel like your idea and this thing is too precious and you're not actually fundamentally willing to let the community take it from you and run with it, then it's going to be really hard to get to that state, because you're constantly going to do these little things that keep members of the community from, the way I like to phrase it is self-organizing in surprising ways. And when we talk about KPIs for a strong community, I love GMs and I love a lot of people saying GMs, but that's not quite a community. You can just flood a channel with GMs, and there is probably a lack of community. So we don't actually even have a GM channel or anything like that in Jump. The number one KPI I look for when building a community is, does the community self-organize in ways that's beneficial to the community? And in order to do that, I think that the first individuals, because when someone self-organizes, what does that really say? What are the values behind that? It means really there's a lot of generosity behind that, right? You're taking time out of your day to do something that you probably aren't getting compensated for in a monetary way. You're definitely not if it's just self-organized and surprising like that. And so you're being generous with your ideas. You're being generous with your time. You might even be generous with your money. In the case of Jump, this was yesterday or the day before, we had members of the community decide to boost the server and Discord. And they just used their own money to boost us up to the next level because they wanted to unlock some stuff. So that was this completely organic, self-organized thing where people were generous with their money. There's other instances in Jump where individuals have decided that they wanted to sort of go deeper with the news and the news content, because we have a news feed channel that kind of where everybody shares industry news that's relevant to the marketers of the world. And there was an individual, and then later a group around that individual. V from Late Checkout, actually, she's CMO over there. She wanted to go deeper into the news and have a conversation because there's just so much happening. And then there's also so much to question and ask about what happens each week in Web3 and in the news. And so this group self-organized a weekly news feed debrief conversation that happens in our audio channel. And so, okay, so how do you actually get there? As the community, whether it's a founding team or an individual, I think the number one thing that you have to do as a team is you have to be generous. And if you're extremely generous, whatever that is, whether it's time or resources or ideas, but if you're extremely generous over and over and over, that generosity, people are going to take that back. They're going to take that and then give it back to where it came from, which is the kind of the community, and that starts to create this bond. And so if we're thinking about community values and what forms a strong community, I think generosity is probably one of the number one values. And why does generosity make sense? Generosity creates a feeling of safeness. When people are generous, you generally feel safe. And why do you need to feel safe? Because when you're going into uncharted territory, that's scary. What are these tokens? Who are these people? Like, what's happening? You need to feel that level of safeness. And it's actually something I pull from the skydiving life. When we're jumping out of planes, I think the biggest jump I was ever on was 64 people. You don't feel, you have to create this sense of generosity and this feeling of trust in order to go off and do something extremely dangerous. And when I think of sort of a common theme in Seed Club and what Seed Club looks for in projects is, what is the great adventure that you're going on? Well, if it's a really great adventure, there's a lot of unknowns and there's a lot of questions. And there's potentially fear associated with those unknowns and questions. And so how do you get past that? You have to be extremely generous. And I actually think Jess, instigator of Seed Club, is extremely generous with his ideas and time and connections and all of that, which is, a reason why I think Seed Club has formed into the project and community that it is. So that's sort of how I think about sort of community from this, the KPI being the community self-organizes in interesting and surprising ways that add value back. But then how do you get there, and like, what are some of the values to bring that to light?
Yeah, I absolutely love that. Hard agree that was also an early lesson that I took from Seed Club and from, how Jess moves in the community. It's something I felt as I came in. And yeah, I love how it contributes to one of the sort of ethos threads that really resonates with me in Web3, which is this abundance mindset and the WAGMI. I think that it's going to continue to be challenged as Web3 grows from sort of just like a organic vibe fest into real actual businesses. And so I think continuing to have that as a central tenet is so key. And it's going to set communities aside, like Jump, like Seed Club, the ones that can hold that center. I think it's going to really show. Yeah, I could talk about that all day. I'm actually curious to just shift a little bit technically because, you've been talking about a lot of like the human aspects of how you did things. And I know that there's been some technical sort of overlays also in how you've gone about making these things possible from, experimenting with tipping, and then, moving into various like token gating mechanisms. So I have a couple sort of technical, tactical questions. One, what has been a real technical unlock or something that you used or put into practice that really had a great impact on your community? And maybe one that was, at the time felt almost intractable. One of those technical challenges that we all encounter in Web3. It's your first time doing something and it's almost painful. But, what was one of those experiences that you eventually got through?
So, yeah, this is good and this is fun because I definitely went in a roundabout circle. And at first, before like when we were talking about technical challenges and doing new things, um, like just try it and just learn and just do it in a kind of an incremental way where if you fail, you're not going to blow the thing up. You have, I like to just say a backup parachute, if you will. And you're going to be safe. So a few of the technical challenges. One, during the cohort, it's like we're building a tokenized community. We should mint this token, and I was kind of racing towards this goal of minting a token, and we're sort of in the phase where we're talking with Roll, and then Roll gets hacked, and that this was this kind of technical moment that just was like Jump hadn't minted a token yet. And if we had, it wouldn't have been that bad because there's no liquidity behind it and all of that stuff. But it was definitely this technical sort of realization of what this world was like and the care and caution that you need to have to implement these true tactical, technical Web3 things. So that was definitely a technical and conceptual kind of challenge to just sort of think through. So then that was in March, pushed back the concept of even minting a token, just said, screw it, not even going to think about that, going to focus solely on community. So then we mint our token on Coinvice in July. And at that point, it's like, okay, we have a community, like we should do token gating and we should do all this Web3 stuff. Started to implement token gating and it was good, like airdropped a few tokens to people, not a lot, we're talking a few hundred. And so it was a good test for people. It felt very like, oh, we're doing Web3 stuff and this is cool. But at the end of the day, then we kind of get to this point of like, well, are we going to have this thing token gated? And this is all just me talking through just like complete inexperience and not actually having some of the tactical, ducks in a row to sort of execute on a few of those things. So we had token gating experience, or implemented, and it worked great. But if the community was going to grow and we were going to learn, everybody wanted more people to come into the community and more ideas to be shared. How are we going to get tokens to people? How would we get them to the right people that care mostly about the project to then have that kind of token gating? So we actually removed the token gating from the community. And we haven't had any token gating since then. So it's been a very manual onboarding process where individuals basically apply and then they're sent a Discord invite and then they enter the community. And that manual process is mostly just to filter out crypto degens that are just like trying to find the next server to hang out in or maybe get like a token tip or just something like that. I would say Jump is very exclusive in terms of we're not a community for token degens, but it's extremely inclusive if you're from the marketing and advertising community. And if you're from the marketing and advertising community, you're more than welcome to sign up and apply, and then an invite link will be sent to you. So just working through those technical challenges of minting a token, how to care for the token, how to get it into the right hands of people, both strategically, who should it go to, and then technically, how do you deliver it to them? Is it on mainnet? There's tons of gas prices. Do you have a treasury set up to pay for those gas prices, or is it coming out of your own ETH in your own wallet? If you go to L2, or is your community ready for L2? They even know how it works. It's just like there's a whole world of cost implications and technical challenges for yourself, but not just for yourself, also for your community as well. So it's totally fine taking your time and kind of working through all of that. We're at such the early stages that strong communities are not going to get passed by others who can move faster from a technical standpoint. I just don't think that's the case. I don't put these communities, I don't think there's this just massive first mover advantage where you're just going to kind of lock up, like kind of in the startup world where it's like, oh, we're going to implement the SaaS model once we get sort of X number of clients, and then we own their data, switching costs are too high, and just kind of like all that first to market kind of stuff where you see startups that are just really hell bent on, onboarding and getting as many customers as possible and getting that lock in and those network effects. There's certainly some sort of moat that these tokenized communities start to form. I want to say that it's the values. And if you lose those values, it's kind of like losing your database. If you're if you're Facebook, your whole moat is your database and it's on lockdown. And losing your values as a community is kind of losing your moat and your competitive advantage. And I feel like it's a lot easier to lose your values than it is to lose your database.
Yeah, I think that we've seen that definitely be the case. Well, I want to thank you. We're just at about time, and I think my main learning is that I need to have you back. And in a few months, as you've continued to accelerate and build and grow, I want to hear where you're at and where you're going, because I think that Jump is just always one of the examples that I lean on when I'm talking about an accelerator success story and someone who's been doing this really thoughtfully. So yeah, thank you.